So hi and welcome everyone to this new edition of the Keptn User Group meeting. And today I'm really excited to have Mauricio here, and he's going to talk about interoperability in CI and CD. Welcome, Mauricio.
Nice to be here. I'm super happy to be here. And yes, interoperability, it's super difficult to pronounce. I will, messed it up several times during the presentation as well.
Yeah, same for me. Just a quick heads up. So Keptn, as a CNCF project, we are following here the CNCF code of conduct. So please be nice to each other in this meeting. The Q&A is open, the chat is open. Feel free to ask questions. I will then just ask these questions to Mauricio during the presentation or at the end of the presentation, however, where they fit best. The whole presentation is also going to be recorded. You will find it later on keptn.sh and also on our YouTube channel. And you will also find all the other Keptn User Group meetings on keptn.sh or on the YouTube channel. And just as some information for you, there will be the next user group meeting then again also in September with a story from a Keptn adopter. And for today, I think I'm already handing over to Mauricio. We will have a look at what he came up with. There will be a demo. I'm really looking forward to this demo. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I will then forward it to Mauricio. So the stage is all yours. I will stop sharing.
Sounds great. Let me share my screen then and let's get started. So yeah, as Jürgen mentioned, I will be talking about interoperability in CI/CD or interoperable CI/CD ecosystems, basically. And the title of the presentation, it's definitely aimed towards kind of like sharing some of the work that we have been doing in the Continuous Delivery Foundation. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Mauricio Salatino. I'm at Salabo in Twitter, and I'm also working as a staff engineer for VMware. And inside VMware, I'm working for a project that's called Knative. Some of you might know that project. It's pretty popular in the in the Kubernetes ecosystem as well. And I will be talking a little bit about that during the presentation. I believe that the main reason why I'm doing this presentation here is because I joined the Continuous Delivery Foundation a couple of years ago when it was created. And since then, I've been working with different teams, different companies, and different open source projects towards trying to understand how we can create a space where projects can go and can share ideas and can start integrating to create like a better CI and continuous delivery ecosystem in general. If you don't know about the foundation, I totally recommend you to check out this website because again, if you are into CI/CD or DevOps or GitOps, this is the perfect place to go there and share your experiences, contribute to different open source projects, and and keep learning basically. Inside the CD Foundation, there are like different special interest groups. That's where the 6 are, and they are focused in doing different kind of like research or experimentation or building integrations between different projects. I've joined one of these 6, one of these special interest groups that it's called Events. And in this specific group, we are focused on creating a common vocabulary for continuous delivery and all the terms and all the entities that are related to continuous delivery. It is a very ambitious task to achieve. It is pretty difficult to come up with a list of terms that will apply to to all the projects that are out there being built right now. But I think that we can start simple. We started simple with a bunch of core terms, and then we started building on top of that. And the main thing is we just expose these terms, this vocabulary, and we try to get feedback from different projects. That's why I'm presenting here in the Keptn meetup. And we just iterated, right? The main idea of creating kind of like this vocabulary, it's kind of like a dictionary of terms, is to be able to enable interoperability between all the tools that adopt kind of like these terms and these concepts, right? And even if the tools doesn't adopt these terms and these concepts, they can kind of like build bridges and build components that will do that integration, enabling interoperability. So we have been doing some research, but because we are like very practical people, we decided to start building POCs, like proof of concepts and examples and some tools in order to materialize kind of like this dictionary of terms and the vocabulary itself. And we quickly realized that the best way for us to start is to focus on events. So we have entities. I will be talking a little bit about the entities and the concepts that we are dealing with right now. But we also need to see tools, and these tools are usually exchanging events. So instead of saying, okay, we will just create, APIs and bridge between APIs, we said, okay, we can observe systems, we can extract the events that are happening in these systems. We can translate that to a common vocabulary, the one that we are defining, and then tools can interact by looking at the events that are being produced by other systems and react to those events, and also share what they are doing by sending events to, to a specified place where we can look for those events and then do something. By looking into events, we also enable all these other use cases that are more related with observability and monitoring and orchestration, right? Like only based on events. So we set up kind of like a list of things that we wanted to deliver as part of this group. As part of this group, the first one was like this protocol agnostic vocabulary, right? Like that's the specification that we're working on that you can find in GitHub. I can just share the links as well. And on top of that specification, we are building tools, again, like SDKs and frameworks that will allow you to create these events and emit these events and also parse these events and read them in different languages. But it cannot be complete. I mean, creating these tools, it's pretty difficult just from the specification point of view. We needed to come up with real life use cases so we can start figuring out what are the best practices for creating these events, for producing them, and also from consuming them, right? Like from different tools perspectives. And then we also needed to go out to projects like Keptn or Tekton that I will be showing in order to see how they are dealing with events and what they are doing with events. In the case of Keptn, it's pretty event-driven, so it was a perfect fit for us to go there, look at it, and start thinking about how kind of like this new vocabulary can be applied to it. So a shared vocabulary, right? Like the vocabulary that we are working on, it's, as I mentioned before, it's just a set of entities that we believe that are pretty common in, in most of the CI/CD tools that are out there, like in the community, right? Like all the open source projects and also the private projects, they are pretty much doing similar things, and they are kind of like defining similar concepts, sometimes with different names, but at like the conceptual level, they are kind of like pretty similar. So we started by defining like 4 different core buckets, as we call them, right? Like they're like just bag of concepts. We have one bucket that it's called core. We believe that pipelines and tasks are quite common and well understood entities or concepts that, in a CI, in a continuous integration environment, almost everybody that is aware of continuous integration will understand what a pipeline and what a task is. On the source code version control bucket, we have repositories, branches, and changes for something like, when we submit a pull request in GitHub or a merge request in Bitbucket, I think it is. And then continuous integration, when we are building things, we understand that we will have some kind of job that it's going to build something. We are going to be testing that something, and we are going to probably creating artifacts from our software that we're building, basically. And finally, the last one, which is a little bit more related to cloud native, because the vocabulary at the beginning, it was pretty abstract and not related to any specific, environment. But the continuous deployment, it's a little bit more related to cloud native deployments, right? Where you have environments, maybe applying GitOps on top of that, and you're basically deploying services, right? This is a little bit, this is the entities that we are trying to tackle in the first iteration of this vocabulary. It's not the full list, but this is mainly where we are focusing right now, because we wanted to show that this can be applied, in real life systems. Of course, if you're building embedded systems, then you can just go and say, okay, I just want to choose the continuous integration bucket, and I will only use these entities. It doesn't mean that you need to adopt everything or nothing, right? Like you can just go pick and choose which concepts are interesting for your use case, and then just use whatever you want. And as I mentioned before, we have the entities, but we're not focusing in the entities themselves. We are focusing on systems that are emitting events about these entities, right? And an event, it's basically a data record expressing that something happened with a very well specified context, right? So if you look at any of the systems that are building, our software nowadays, you will see that the pipeline has a started event, an artifact has been published event, or when you go in GitHub and create a branch, GitHub is actually emitting an event that it's the branch was created. So you can tap into these events and then do stuff and automate things together by looking at these events. So for each of the entities that I mentioned before, we have defined a set of events that we are expecting, tools to create and to emit. And at the same time, we are planning to use these events to make other tools to understand what, the first tool was doing and to be able to react on it. And also to be able to send events back to that tool and say, okay, you started the pipeline and I deploy the service, then you can do something else, as I will be showing in the demo of this presentation. Again, as I mentioned before, we have decided to build something. We wanted to show that tools can interoperate by using this common vocabulary that we are creating, and this common vocabulary that it's basically defining events. So we looked into some of the projects that are pretty popular, like Tekton, which is a pipeline engine that it's cloud native. It runs on top of Kubernetes. It does a bunch of nice things. They were already using cloud events for defining their own Tekton events for when pipelines were created and all these things. We looked into Keptn, which is very event-driven. I will be talking a little bit about that later on. And also because I work at Knative, but also because Knative is pretty good at like dealing with cloud events and routing cloud events. We included cloud like Knative eventing into the demo as well. We are expecting to be able to replicate this demo that I will be showing with other tools as well. And I know that other people it's working on, for example, on the Jenkins project to be able to emit cloud events. So as soon as we have something that can emit cloud events, we can start integrating these tools by using this shared vocabulary. So as I mentioned before, Tekton is like a cloud native pipeline engine that allows you to define pipelines with tasks inside. It allows you to do that by defining, Kubernetes resources that basically contains the pipeline definition. It provides that declarative approach. So if you're in the Kubernetes ecosystem, it's pretty easy to get used to Tekton and to, basically define the pipelines that can do whatever you want. It's pretty lightweight the way that it's being built. It's being built to scale by using the Kubernetes constructs, and that's pretty nice when you are in that ecosystem. It is really non-opinionated in the sense that it gives you some concepts like pipelines and tasks, but you can create any kind of pipeline that you want, right? Like if you want to, build embedded systems again, you can just build them there and then release them to multiple architectures. You can build microservices with it. You can build whatever thing that you can imagine, you can do with the pipeline, right? You can automate tasks, like triggering cron jobs and doing crazy stuff with pipelines and listening to events and then reacting to those as well. And as I mentioned before, Tekton, pretty early on, they adopted cloud events. So they kind of like are already emitting cloud events, their own cloud events, but they are already working with cloud events, which makes it much easier for us, like when we start looking into Tekton to integrate and to conceptualize where to hook and where to get the specific Tekton cloud events and transform them to our own cloud events, basically. Keptn, in the other hand, it's a lifecycle management tool for cloud native applications. It allows you to do like orchestration of tools related with CI with CI and CD as well. It's event-driven by nature, right? It's basically an event-driven kind of like state machine that allows you to orchestrate different tools together, which is pretty nice. And again, because it's event-driven, it kind of like fit pretty nice to the story of the the SIG events kind of like group. And that's why we just start looking into it, and we decided to go ahead and create like a POC with this. And it, of course, it adds a lot of value on top of on top of normal tools that you will use inside like your CI pipelines and your delivery pipelines by just adding quality gates and remediation that I'm not showing here in this demo today, but I'm really looking forward to start adding these kind of things to show entire like full cycle of the tools being used. And finally, as I mentioned before, Knative eventing, it's basically an abstraction for creating producers and consumers of events in a cloud native application. When you're working with Kubernetes, it basically provides these abstractions of defining who can produce an event and who can consume an event, and all the mechanisms to route the events from producers to consumers, right? It gives you kind of like that declarative power of defining these systems and how they are wired together at runtime, right? Like you can just deploy different systems and then say, okay, that service will connect to that service via messages. And you do that by defining what in Knative are called triggers or subscription for events, right? Like, so you can say, I'm interested in this kind of event, and just create a filter. So you can say the type of the event or some data or some metadata that the event has. And then if that's matching, you're going to be able to receive that event. The nice thing about Knative eventing is that it allows you to plug different, event broker implementations. So this router of events can be plugged, and that's pretty nice, at least for developers like myself. I know that I want to share events between different services, but I don't want to make a decision about like if I want to do it with Kafka, or if I'm in Google Cloud, I want to do it with Google PubSub, or if I'm in AWS, I want to do it with Amazon SQS, right? So these abstractions allows you to leave your applications as they are, configure them at runtime, and then you can just choose the right implementation for you, depending on which cloud provider are you running, or what kind of like infrastructure do you have in your, in your data centers, which is pretty nice. Like abstractions are usually good, and Knative one is providing that abstraction for event-based systems, which is something that sooner or later you will need if you're working in Kubernetes. So let's take a look at the demo. So in the demo, I will be showing a local setup. It's running on my laptop on Kubernetes Kind. So I have a Kubernetes Kind instance. I have Keptn installed in that cluster. I have Tekton installed in that cluster. I have Knative installed in that cluster. So my computer, it's pretty loaded. And a big shout out here to Andrea Fritoli from IBM Black Chip in Twitter, who worked a lot in this, in this POC and created an amazing script that allows me to, bootstrap all these components by just running a single command. This POC can be found like in this the directory here, like in GitHub as well. And I totally recommend you to check it out, because you can definitely run it in your own laptop with this script. And if you are interested in these projects and how they are interacting, I totally recommend you to do that, right? Like, what better way to learn that just trying it by yourself and figuring out what's going on between the different components. So what do we have? So the scenario that we were trying to model here in the demo, and before I show it, I need to explain what the demo is doing, because it's pretty, like, again, there are tons of different components and like complex, but not so complex interactions, but they require some explanation. So imagine that you're working in a company and you have a pipeline to build a service, right? Like an application. Let's say that it's a web application. So you know that pipeline will basically go and fetch the source code, build the source code, depending on the language that it's being built. You need to have the tools to build that source code. Then you need to create a Docker container if you want to run inside Kubernetes, and then you basically need to package that and publish that somewhere so you can actually run that in a remote Kubernetes cluster. As soon as you have that artifact, then the next step is usually to trigger a deployment. And in order to deploy that, you basically need to choose in which environment do you want to deploy that artifact, how to deploy that artifact. And for that, we have another Tekton pipeline defined that basically can do that. But we wanted to, so the developers that created those pipelines doesn't want to actually run, for example, these pipelines in their own environments. They need another team that basically define what needs to happen for those things to be deployed, for example, in a production environment, right? And for that, they have defined a Keptn sequence that basically are going to orchestrate these pipelines, right? In order to basically orchestrate that delivery process. So that sequence basically will include some kind of some sort of validation from the team that is in charge of deploying things to production, but the way to deploy into production, it's basically defined by a Tekton pipeline. So in this very simple use case where we build software, then we have another team that is in charge of deploying the software, or at least authorizing the deployment of the software. We have two different tools, again, like Keptn and Tekton, that needs to be used. And we want our teams to be able to interact, right? Like, and to interoperate and to be able to use these tools together in a very natural way. So we started with these two tools, right? Like, and these two tools, they come with different components inside, right? And as I mentioned before, they both understand about what cloud events are, but they both are defining their own cloud events, right? Like, so we have Keptn cloud events in Keptn side, and we have Tekton cloud events in the Tekton side, right? They do not understand. They do not understand each other, right? Like, if we want to build an integration between these two tools, we will need to create some kind of translator, right? Like, and it needs to be bidirectional, right? Like, let's say that Tekton is sending Tekton events. We will need to pick the Tekton events and then translate to Keptn events, so Keptn can understand what Tekton is doing and then just do something about it, right? And if we want to do it the other way around, like Keptn is doing something, for example, it's requesting a deployment, and that deployment is implemented by a Tekton pipeline, we will need to be able to take that Keptn event and translate it to Tekton, so Tekton know what to do with it, right? And the problem then that of course that can be done, like that's integration, basically like system integration. There are tools to do that, but it becomes really project specific, right? If imagine that now you have Jenkins or you have another tool that you want to use, then you will need to build another bidirectional translator for that extra tool, right? And the more tools you have in the ecosystem, we all know that in CI/CD, if you go and take a look at the CNCF and the CD Foundation, you will see that there are tons of different tools, right? If you want to build one integration for each pair of tools, then you will end up, spending 3-4 years writing integrations only, right? We need to avoid doing that. So what the next thing that you can do is basically it's just have a common vocabulary, like the one that we are defining, right? Like these continuous delivery events that we are creating inside this group. And then we can create a single translator for each of these tools, right? And then we can just let them interact, right? And that's pretty much what we did. So we created, like something for Tekton, like a component for Tekton that it's going to emit these, common vocabulary events. And we created something for Keptn that it's going to understand, this common vocabulary and also emit events from that vocabulary, right? And those are the components that we have here, right? So we have Tekton Cloud Events, that it's an extension to Tekton that basically knows when to emit, these common vocabulary events. And you can imagine, because it's a pipeline engine, we are going to be emitting, pipeline started events. We will be emitting, artifacts published events, and maybe service deployed events, for example. And on the other hand, in Tekton, we have 2 different components, and that's just because we started like that, but it can be just one. And in this case, we have a component that understands, these common vocabulary events and translate that to Keptn internally, and another one that basically picks up the events that are being sent by Keptn and transform them into, this common vocabulary specification that we have. So then they can just understand each other and share that, but not only between these 2 tools, they will be able to talk with any other tools that are, doing kind of like the same approach and using the same vocabulary. We hope in the group that at some point when the vocabulary is mature enough, tools are going to start using that inside kind of like the tools themselves, instead of just using extensions to these tools. We are very positive that that's going to happen, but we need to keep reiterating the event formats and the content of the events so they become more useful for, a wide range of tools. When you are in this situation, right, like when you already have, a common vocabulary and the components that are emitting and consuming this, new cloud events format, then you start wondering about, okay, what transport do you use, right? Another thing that we wanted to avoid doing in the demo is to send events from Tekton straight to Keptn, right? Because again, that makes it pretty poor for from the scalability point of view. If we just send an HTTP request from one tool to another, then we need to care about retrying when something goes wrong. We need to make sure that the services are available and they are reachable and all these kind of things. And for that reason, we decided to use their Knative eventing, as I mentioned before. And again, Knative eventing provide this idea of a cloud events broker, like a Knative broker by default. It deals with cloud events and it routes cloud events. And then, as I mentioned before, we created these triggers of subscriptions for these tools, right? So the tools now, they don't need to know about each other. They just need to know that where the broker is and then send events to the broker. And then based on the subscriptions, the events are going to be consumed by different components, right? In this case, you can see that, Tekton is putting events in the broker, and then there is a subscription that is picking those events and sending it to Keptn, right? And the same here, we know that whenever there is a Keptn event, we need to put it in the broker. And if there is a pipeline listening, or a pipeline waiting for an event to start, it's going to be picking that event from the broker and then just starting a pipeline. And that's pretty much what I will be showing now live. But one more thing before moving forward is the fact that it is important when we are building this integration, ecosystems, and when we are making different tools to interact and to interoperate, you kind of like start losing the big picture of what's happening, right? And again, once again, like by using this cloud native, the Knative broker, in this case, we can tap into all events, for example. We can just create a subscription for every event that it's been placed in the broker, and then send to some kind of like monitoring or, visualization tool that allows you to see the entire flow, right? And we have kind of like a very simple application here that basically show all the cloud events that are being put in the broker in this case. So let me jump to the demo. I don't know, Jürgen, if you want to summarize something there. I took it as slow as possible, but I know that there are like tons of things.
Yeah, thanks for explaining everything in detail. I just want to mention, because a couple of you already know about Keptn events, and then we saw the slide from you, Mauricio, with kind of the CDF events. So they are very, very similar. It's we are not trying to invent something completely new here. We are actually working together, where we are we want to implement the eventing standard that will be established by the CDF, but we also want to bring in our expertise in other parts and kind of to enrich those events, that there can be one eventing standard, eventing definition that serves all the different use cases, and then we basically all the different tools, then they implement this. So this is the, currently they are not exactly the same. So for this, we need this inbound and outbound translator, as you also explained. But this is the kind of the reason and the history of the events that we will see on the Tekton side, and the events that we will see on the Keptn side. And then there was one question coming in. Can we have a look at the last slide that you just showed? Because the question was directly related to this.
This one?
Yeah, related to the cloud events player. And the question was, can the Keptn's bridge serve as the cloud events player? And maybe I can answer this really quick. Because the Keptn's bridge, it's more the UI for Keptn, and you will see each and every cloud event inside of Keptn. But of course, all the other cloud events that are not going to Keptn you cannot see them in Keptn. So this is the reason why there is a specific component. And I think even like all the events that go through the cloud events broker can be shown in the cloud events player, right?
Yeah, that's the main idea there. It's like in each of the tools, you probably can see all the events that are related to that specific tool. But when you start using multiple tools together, then you start, losing kind of like what's kind of like the entire sequence. And Keptn does a great job at like showing the sequences and showing kind of like which events are being sent from the Keptn perspective, which is pretty good because Keptn was designed for integration purposes and for orchestrating multiple tools. But you can see that, Tekton wasn't designing that way. So in order to see the full picture, you definitely need to take a look at some kind of like, at the broker level in this case. But yeah, I'm guessing that the more that we make progress on the vocabulary, like tools will pop up to show all the, all the common vocabulary events and to aggregate them and to, have a really nice UI showing that. Cool. So, yeah, I just wanted to share, like, that's kind of like the GitHub, the GitHub repository for the SIGIS event. That's where the POC, like the proof of concept is. That's where you will find kind of like the vocabulary. In this case, I wanted to show that we have kind of like, again, these buckets. We have the definition of the events, and you can see that, for example, if I go to core, as I mentioned before, we have the events that are defined for pipelines, right? Like, so we have pipeline queued, pipeline started, pipeline finished, and then about tasks, and then the data that these events should carry on, right? Again, we're just trying to define the minimum set of things that you need in order to do, interoperability between different tools. And we know that the vocabulary is not perfect, but that's why we are kind of like iterating it and just presenting about it, so people is aware and they can just go and bring their expertise as the Keptn folks are doing, because they already built most of these events already. They already have one of these events implemented in their tools. So we wanted to just leverage that expertise and then just put them in a common language, as Jürgen was mentioning before. So as I mentioned before, I have Tekton installed, I have Keptn installed, and I have the Cloud Events player also like looking for events. And as I also mentioned before, the scenario was that I have two pipelines, one for building artifacts and the other one for deploying that artifact into an environment. And I have Keptn with the defined sequence for basically doing that deployment, right? So let me first show you a bit of the pipeline here that I have. So the first pipeline that basically it's called build artifact, it's defined in Tekton, and you can use the Tekton command line tool to just kind of like explore how the pipeline is being configured. So these are just properties for the pipeline. Where is the source code for the application that we are going to build? Where is the Docker file that is going to be used to create a container? Where should we push that container? And what's kind of like the version that we are going to create for that application? And here in the task section, basically you can see exactly kind of like what the pipeline is doing. So the first one is cloning the repository from GitHub. It goes to that repository, it clones that specific branch, and then it's going to use Canico, which is a tool to build containers inside Kubernetes. So it's going to basically build that application container and then just push it into a container registry. In this case, happening here inside Keptn. So this pipeline is pretty straightforward. It's just going to do that. And we can run this pipeline by just running this command that I can share as well. But if you're running the POC, you will see that as soon as you kind of like run the script, you are going to see this last line to start the pipeline. When you start pipelines in Tekton using kind of like the command line tool, you can parameterize the pipeline using different values, right? Like which source code do you want to go clone and build? And I will just accept all the defaults here, like the main branch, where is the Docker file, and where to push that Docker file, right? And again, just the target name of the application. So I can accept all these things, and then what I will see here is the pipeline running now in Tekton. This is running inside my Keptn Kubernetes cluster, and it's going to execute these three tasks: just cloning the source code from the repository, and then building the image, and then just pushing that image to a repository. As you can see here, just again, like the pipeline executing, I can tail the logs in here, or I can see these into the Tekton dashboard here, like the user interface. And I can just make this bigger, where you are going to see exactly the same thing that you're going to see in the terminal, right? Like these three tasks being executed. And that step is completed. Now you can see that the container is being built. At some point, we should be able to see some logs in here as well. And that's completed. And now it's running the last task, which is basically exporting the results. And I think that the pipeline is done already, right? Like, so the pipeline is succeeded, everything went right. And one thing that we can see in here, let me refresh this, is that a new Docker image called POC was created, and it has a very specific SHA for this build. And that SHA is the one that we can just go now and look into Keptn. So as I mentioned before, we just run a pipeline that it's basically building an artifact. And we can see the events that were created by that pipeline in this case. So again, let me make this bigger, and let's see if the UI supports that. So you can see that there was one of these events that again was defined by the CD Foundation, that its pipeline run queued, the pipeline was queued, the pipeline was started, the pipeline was finished, and finally the last event that was emitted here is that the artifact was packaged, right? Like it was packaged as a Docker container. So we are emitting that event, and we have a Keptn listener that it's basically looking for these events and triggering a sequence based on that, right? So now I'm jumping to the Keptn bridge here, and I have a production sequence here, like a delivery sequence as well. That basically it's telling me that there is a new artifact that was created, and that's the SHA of the artifact that was created. I'm sharing now data with Keptn, and the delivery sequence here is saying that it's waiting for approval, right? So I can click in here. Maybe I need to make it smaller. Where is it? Let me refresh that.
Maybe just
yeah,
refreshing.
There you go.
Yeah,
was the typical refresh. Yeah, so basically the pipeline, the sequence in Keptn was triggered, and the first thing on that sequence is a manual approval, right? And again, we are here simulating a team that it's waiting for artifacts to be published, and as soon as a new artifact is published, they need to basically validate it and then just accept that they're going to promote that to the production environment. So here we have like a manual approval defined inside the Keptn sequence. And as soon as we hit OK for this artifact, then the sequence will move to the next step. And the next step is basically doing a deployment. But Keptn is not going to do the deployment. It's just going to send a cloud event to Tekton, so Tekton can run another pipeline to do that deployment to the production environment. Again, showing how Keptn can orchestrate different tools. You can be doing, for example, the build with Tekton and then the deployment with Jenkins or with any other tools like Spinnaker or any other CI tool. As you can see here, Keptn is telling us that that it's been handled by Tekton. That basically means that another pipeline was triggered in the Tekton side. I can show you that here. The deploy artifact pipeline was triggered, and you can see here that there was a deployment step and then just configuring an ingress so we can access to the application. And in Keptn, it also provides this really nice link here that we can click and access the application, right? And again, a big shout out to Andrea for building this kind of like simple application. And you can see that he was presenting here in an IBM conference as well. So that's really cool. So this is the application that it's up and running in our production environment. And that was deployed by Keptn, but it was orchestrated. Sorry, it was deployed by Tekton, but it was orchestrated by the delivery sequence in Keptn, which required the manual approval basically at the beginning. Again, if I go to the Cloud Events player here and I refresh and zoom out a little bit less here, you can see that after the artifact package event that was sent by the first pipeline, then we have Keptn, saying that there is a new artifact being published, and that created like a new, it triggered a new pipeline in Tekton that was started. It deployed a new service, so we have service deployed event because we have our application up and running in the production environment, and then the pipeline finished, right? And that's pretty much what I wanted to show today. I know, again, it's a complex interaction between different tools, but think about this. Think about the idea that if we are all using the same events, we can start integrating multiple tools, and the scenarios will be way much more complex. But at the end of the day, you should be able to use the best tool for the job, right? And when you have like real life projects, this is quite common, right? Like you will not just choose a single tool and just do everything with it. You will just choose the best tool for each of the things that you need to do, and then you will hope to be able to make them all work together and play nice. For now, we believe that this is really promising, and we will keep working on this vocabulary. And we really appreciate, the Keptn community input in this. So if you're watching online now, or if you're watching the recording, please get in touch if you're interested in these topics. Jürgen, that's pretty much it. Do you want to add something on top of that?
Thanks so much for the whole demo. I think it's really powerful, everything that we saw here. The whole translation part. Maybe we can go back to the image once again, to this one, because we could really see that it's the same kind of events that are sent. So we really saw in the Cloud Events player, we saw this, let's say, the standard that we want to establish, and like the form of communication that we want to have, and you could really see the whole journey. From deployment all the way to production, although it was not a multi-stage, including quality gates, but you can easily build this. We already saw the approval step, which is pretty cool that you already included this. And we can imagine that before or after the approval, there might be another stage, there might be tests to be executed. But again, the tests would also be some kind of a cloud event, and we would trigger the test. So the whole idea of having this vocabulary, a common vocabulary, and having all these different tools, not only deployment tools, but also testing tools, playing together. I think it's a really strong idea, and thanks for showing this. I see there are some questions coming in.
Sure.
I will just forward this question. It's from Julian, and it goes, cool, first of all. If you talked to serverless workflows team, could be another one of those tools to plug into vocabulary.
100%, yes. Yeah, and I think that that's really important. Like, I'm definitely into workflows as well. So I do believe that that's yeah, the more projects that we can start getting into it, the better, right? And it's really important, for example, for me to take a look at all the projects that are doing deployments, all the projects that are dealing with services like even Kubernetes itself or cloud providers. And again, the more projects that we can get involved, the more that this vocabulary will grow, and it will enable more tools to integrate in the same ecosystem and in the same way using the same mechanism. So 100%. If you want to get involved, that's why I'm just leaving this slide here. You can definitely join like the SIG events, Slack channel there, and inside the CDF Foundation Slack organization. And we do like meetings every 2 weeks, and we are pretty open. It's like everybody there like comes from different companies with different backgrounds, but they are all interested in just pushing this forward. So yeah, if you have any ideas, please feel free to just drop me a message or a comment or join the Slack, and let's start the conversation.
Perfect. Also, I want to just mention here, if you're from the Keptn community and you want to also help contributing Keptn to this, then please reach out, because we already opened up a discussion on the CDF GitHub repo, where we still have to do our homework of defining all the Keptn events. And if you're already using Keptn and familiar with Keptn, let us know. We can always use some additional eyes and to have a look at this and kind of shape this. So that would be really cool if we can move this into a community effort.
Sounds good. I will be sharing these. I can share these links with you, Jürgen, and then we just can put them with the recording as well. I think that people usually tend to want to go and look by themselves, like the vocabulary, the POC, and the different groups and documents that we are creating.
There was actually another question, but maybe it's answered on this slide. How to kind of how to replay the demo, how to download the demo? It's this one here.
Yep, this one here, and here you can find basically a script that basically will install all these things, even creating kind of like a Kubernetes cluster locally. It requires you to have some tools installed, right? Like this poc.sh. And it explains here what's required, what's necessary, and the components that are going to be installed for running the demo that I just ran, right? And yeah, again, here are more diagrams and the tools that are installed by the script and the events that are being sent as well. So yep, if you start trying this out and something doesn't work, or if you want to contribute to it, you can send a pull request, or you can just create issues, and we will be happily assisting and just updating this demo as we go further.
Cool, thank you. Are there any more questions on the demo or on the topic, or anything else you want to share or ask Mauricio? Then please send us the questions in the Slack. Sorry, in the chat here or via Q&A. I will just give it another second if some questions are coming in. In the meanwhile, I want to already thank you for your presentation and the whole POC. I think it's really great to see how all these tools can come together, and that's actually, I really believe this is the future of all the different integrations that we want to build. If we can kind of agree on one definition, then it will be so much easier instead of learning all these different APIs. So that's really something where you as the CDF communities are really putting a lot of effort into, but I really think it will be worth it and will make our lives easier.
Yep. In the long run, this should simplify all the integration between different tools, but it's pretty tough, as you know. But I think that we are on the right track, and we have the right people there, and we are looking for more people. So thank you, Rob.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Rob, for your comments here. I think we are good here. If you have more questions for Mauricio, you will find him in the CDF Slack, also on Twitter. If possible, we can maybe also share your slides with the recording.
Yep.
Perfect. Then you will also find the Twitter handle, and he also just shared it here. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much for the presentation and the demo. And yeah, looking forward to see more integrations and to see this whole vocabulary thing moving forward.
Great. Thank you, Jürgen, for having me, and it was a pleasure. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.